Chapter 37. Jim Garfield at home with Tiffanie Ankles. Jim Garfield sat on an oversized couch watching Crime and Justice, Animal Protection with Tiffanie Ankles. He rubbed his lady's feet, which were under a blanket. Jim Garfield was not a foot guy. He thought that women's feet were as ugly as men's feet. Painting the nails a pretty color just did not help the situation. He could rub them, but he could not look at them. Thus, they remained covered up in a pink blanket. Foot rubs kept Tiffanie quiet. So, too, did the compelling story of the Animal Protection Unit busting a pigeon poacher. The TV story had been ripped from the headlines, wherein an undocumented Chinese woman admitted to killing as many as 10 pigeons a day that she in turn sold to families who had been smuggled from China. The Crime and Justice writers changed the pigeon hunter into a white man who lived on Park Avenue, but they kept the essence of the story. Jim Garfield needed Tiffanie to remain quiet so that he could think. The wall screen TV chatter was fine, but he would not be able to carry on a conversation and think what needed to be thought. Life changes fast. It changes even faster for criminals. A few short years ago, Jim Garfield had gone from modestly successful criminal to a Texas inmate. In prison, he met Ray and David Hunter Duncan, as well as other learned, if not great, criminal minds. His sentence was cut to probation after the filing of a class action suit involving prison overcrowding. He went back to Houston and met his parole officer, or community supervisor as they now like to be called. Surprising to Jim Garfield, his CS would usher him into a criminal network. Ray and David Hunter Duncan would later get paroled, and they also found themselves under the supervision of the flamboyant CS. They too found themselves introduced to mysterious criminal networks. After the CS's flamboyance turned to madness, and he was sent to a nut house, the network seemed to fall apart. Jim Garfield decided to take what he had learned and to start his own criminal enterprise. He had been reintroduced to a nerdy cousin he barely knew named Phil McDaniel. It would turn out that Phil McDaniel was a drug chemist who was passionate about the next generation of smart drugs. And Jim Garfield, so it seemed, had found the Merlin to complement his Knights of the Round Table. Through Phil McDaniel, Jim Garfield met a coldly hostile chemist named Joe Fungo. Jim Garfield kept his chemist isolated from his distributors, Ray and David Hunter Duncan, so that he would always be needed. With the crazy CS out of the way, Jim Garfield hooked up with the CS's attractive girlfriend, who happened to be a federal probation officer. Although she was reluctant at first, the PO ultimately put Jim Garfield in touch with some talented and tight-lipped criminals. With Ulysses Johnson, the lunatic CS committed to an asylum, Mary Elizabeth Jones needed financial help. Jim Garfield provided that help. It wasn't long before she was pregnant with a son. Life changes fast for criminals. Inspired by biological attacks on key criminal justice targets in Harris County, attacks that Jim Garfield would learn had been orchestrated by Ulysses Johnson's family, Joe Fungo persuaded Jim Garfield to allow him to chemically attack criminal justice targets in Waller County. In a decision he would regret, Jim Garfield agreed to the chemical attack. Innocent people, including 2 children, were killed. When Jim Garfield thought that things could not get more complicated, David Hunter Duncan's son got popped in Memphis. Then Ulysses, the crazy CS, escaped from his family's private loony bin and returned to the street determined to jumpstart his network. David Hunter Duncan and Ray launched an amateurish chemical attack that was about as destructive as a mosquito fogger. Afraid that they might try something even more foolish, Jim Garfield decided to introduce Joe Fungo to David Hunter Duncan. Joe Fungo might be a terrorist, but he was a competent terrorist. That was 2 days ago. Jim Garfield had given a lot of thought to retiring, taking what cash he had squirreled away, and bye-bye. David Hunter Duncan would do something stupid. Joe Fungo would do something destructive. Ulysses would do something crazy. And no telling what Mary Elizabeth Jones might do. Walk away from the table while you're still ahead. Then, tonight, Tiffanie Ankles reveals she is pregnant. Whatever plans Jim Garfield might have had were popped like a bubble. He had sired a girl and a boy, and he was still surprised how much he enjoyed their company, even though his daughter's mother moved to Dallas and shacked up with a jealous creep who impeded communication between daddy and daughter. Still, it was nice to know his baby was out there in the bigger world, and he liked scanning her mother's MySpace page to see current photos of her. The pregnancy would be more complicated because Tiffanie Ankles was stupid. It took Jim Garfield a while to realize that hers was not a feigned stupidity. She was, as it turned out, annoyingly stupid. Reva Mae Vinson was street smart and people smart and wise beyond her years. Mary Elizabeth Jones was academically smart. Tiffanie Ankles was appallingly stupid. She loved crime and justice. That should have been the giveaway. But with her perfectly proportioned body and her fire-red bush, who needs a Rhodes Scholar? Of course, there's stupidity, and then there is crime and justice stupid. Tiffanie Ankles fell into the latter category. When she told Jim the news, there were tears and hugs of boundless joy. A few minutes later, Crime and Justice came on, and it was as if nothing had happened. She was mesmerized. Even during the commercials, all she talked about was crime and justice. Tiffanie paused to discuss the plot with Jim Garfield. What's the big deal about eating pigeons? The cops don't have anything better to do? Exactly, Jim Garfield said to himself. And you have nothing better to do than watch Pigeon Patrol? But he kept his thoughts to himself and pleasantly asked his pregnant princess if he could serve her some ice cream. As he scooped the triple chocolate ice cream and smothered it in chocolate-tinted whipped cream, Jim Garfield resumed his planning. David Hunter Duncan would try something else to get his son out of jail, and it would probably be something reckless. As a known associate, the feds would come looking for Jim Garfield. Jim Garfield had planned his exit for a long time. He had built several alternate IDs of various degrees of integrity. He had money stashed away in different places under different names. But he knew life on the run was never glamorous, and he was not ready to abandon the world he had created. Jim Garfield handed Tiffanie the bowl of ice cream and studied her sweet face. He would miss her, and he might not ever hold the child she carried. It was then that insight struck Jim Garfield. He had missed out on most of his daughter's life. He would not miss out on Frankie or Tiffany's baby. He had to stay. He had to stay in control. This is the life he had chosen. The show was rolling, and Tiffanie Ankles turned her head to watch. He then placed the blanket over Tiffany's feet and rubbed them till she moaned with comfort. The lead detective was denouncing the barbarity of pigeon consumption while extolling the merits of a vegan diet to his carnivore underlings. Jim Garfield winced at the critically acclaimed hokum. Life changes fast for criminals. Okay, a little postscript. This is the second version of this, and it's not near as good as the first, except the first one does have a large gap in there where I lost the page. So this is a backup.